My girlfriend's family called me trash until I bought their mansion. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. I walked into the mansion her family swore I'd never touch. The air smelled faintly of cedar polish and expensive wine, the kind of scent that used to make me feel like I didn't belong. Claire's parents stood frozen in the grand foyer, Gregory with his jaw tight, Sylvia gripping her pearls. For once, their sneers slipped. The place they'd used to measure my worth now had my name on the deed. But let me back up. My name is Ethan. I'm 28, and for most of my adult life I've worked as a mechanic. I fix cars, scrape grease out from under my nails, and earn just enough to keep my modest apartment and put something aside each month. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. Every time I went to dinner with Claire's family, though, Gregory made sure I knew exactly how little he thought of me. Trash, he once muttered when I offered to help carry their groceries. Claire deserves better than a man who smells like oil. Sylvia didn't even try to hide her laugh. Claire always defended me, but their words cut deep. They weren't just mocking my job, they were mocking who I was. Still, I stayed quiet, because I loved Claire. I thought if I worked hard enough, maybe one day I'd earn their respect. But the truth is, respect was never theirs to give. It took years of humiliation before I realized something important. Every insult was fuel. Every smirk, every roll of Gregory's eyes. Those became reasons to keep saving, keep learning, keep building. And that's how I ended up standing in their marble foyer, holding the keys to everything they once used against me. But the story of how I got here didn't start with triumph. It started with shame, one night, one dinner, and one word that branded me forever. Because the first time Gregory called me trash was the night everything began to unravel. That single word shattered me, but it also lit a fire I couldn't extinguish. I first met Claire at a neighborhood diner, the kind of place her parents would never set foot in. She spilled coffee on her blouse. I handed her a napkin, and we started talking. She didn't care that I worked with my hands. She cared that I listened, that I laughed at her sarcastic jokes, that I showed up when I said I would. But her family? From the moment they found out I was a mechanic, the judgment began. Gregory always wore his superiority like a tailored suit. Cars, he scoffed the first time we shook hands. I suppose someone has to do the dirty work. His grip was firm, his eyes dismissive. Sylvia followed his lead, giving me a smile so sharp it felt like a paper cut. They lived in a mansion that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. Marble floors, high ceilings, chandeliers dangling like trophies. My own apartment, with its creaky radiator and secondhand furniture, felt like a punchline whenever I left their home. Still, I kept showing up. Not because I enjoyed the humiliation, but because Claire meant more to me than my pride. She'd squeeze my hand under the table whenever her father made one of his remarks. One night, Gregory leaned back in his leather chair, swirling a glass of brandy. "Claire," he said loudly, ignoring me, "you could have chosen a doctor, a lawyer, even an accountant. But instead, you bring home someone who spends his life under a hood." Sylvia chuckled softly. "At least he'll always have work. Everyone's car breaks down eventually." My face burned. Claire snapped, "Dad, Mom, stop. He's not trash. He's hardworking, and he's more decent than half the men you brag about at your parties." Gregory smirked at me, like my girlfriend's defense only proved his point. "Decency doesn't pay the mortgage, sweetheart." I wanted to fire back, but the words caught in my throat. All I could do was swallow the bitterness, pretend I didn't care, and remind myself that love meant enduring things you shouldn't have to. But as much as I told myself I could handle it, their contempt started leaving scars I couldn't ignore. The breaking point came the night Gregory humiliated me in front of his entire circle. The night that still lingers like a bad taste in my mouth was Gregory's annual summer gala. He hosted it every year at the mansion, inviting local politicians, business associates, and anyone else whose presence polished his reputation. Claire begged me to come, assuring me it would be different this time. I wanted to believe her. I wore my best suit, navy, pressed, and as crisp as I could make it. The second I stepped into that hall, though, I felt out of place. Glittering gowns swept across marble floors. Men in tailored tuxedos laughed with cigars in hand. And there I was, the mechanic trying not to scuff his shoes on imported tile. Introductions were awkward from the start. "This is Ethan," Claire would say. "My boyfriend." Smiles would freeze. Eyes flickered toward Gregory, waiting for his cue on how to react. He never missed the chance. "Oh yes, Ethan fixes cars," he'd explain, like I was a curiosity. "Keeps the grease out of his hair, most days." Polite laughter followed, though some people actually glanced at my hairline as if checking. I clenched my jaw and forced a smile. Claire's hand tightened around mine, silently begging me not to explode. As the night wore on, I drifted toward the buffet table, trying to stay invisible. That's when Gregory's booming voice cut across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet Ethan," he called, summoning attention I didn't want. "He's dating my daughter." Yes, the same Claire who could have had her pick of surgeons, CEOs, or senators' sons. But don't worry, if your Bentley ever breaks down, he's your man. The laughter this time wasn't polite, it was cruel. Heads turned, eyes gleamed with amusement at my expense. I froze, heat flooding my face. I wanted to vanish. Claire stormed over, fury in her eyes. "Dad, enough," she snapped. "You have no idea how hard Ethan works, or what he's worth." Gregory waved her off with mock indulgence. "Relax, sweetheart. We're just having fun." But it wasn't fun. Not for me. I stood there, feeling stripped of dignity, reduced to a punchline in front of strangers. And in that moment, I swore I'd never forget the way that room laughed. That night planted a seed of determination I never knew I carried. In the weeks after the gala, Claire and I barely saw her parents. She said they were busy, but I knew what that meant. Gregory had embarrassed me, and now he wanted distance. Still, Claire insisted on bringing me to a charity dinner hosted by one of her father's friends. She said it would be smaller, more intimate, and maybe her father would behave differently. He didn't. The dinner was held in a sleek downtown restaurant, the kind where you don't get a menu, just courses delivered like works of art. We were seated at a long table with about 20 guests. Gregory positioned himself at the head, of course, with Claire and me closer to the middle. I tried to blend in, nodding politely, listening more than I spoke. But Gregory had other plans. After the second course, he leaned across the table, voice just loud enough for everyone around us to hear. "Claire, did you see Thomas is here?" he said, nodding toward a tall man in a gray suit across the table. Fresh out of law school, already making six figures. Comes from a good family. Claire stiffened. "Dad, really?" Gregory smiled, pretending innocence. "I'm just saying, it's nice when a man has ambition. Not everyone's content turning wrenches." The words hit like a slap. I swallowed hard, feeling the eyes of half the table shift toward me. Claire didn't let it slide. "Ethan's not content, Dad. He's hardworking, and he's building something real." Gregory chuckled, shaking his head as though humoring a child. "Sweetheart, love is fine, but security matters. You'll understand one day." I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the urge to stand up and walk out. Claire's mother, Sylvia, chimed in smoothly, her voice dripping with condescension. "Gregory only means well. We just want the best for you, darling." I realized then it wasn't just Gregory, it was the whole family. To them, I wasn't a partner. I was a placeholder until Claire came to her senses. The rest of the evening blurred. I kept silent, humiliated, while Gregory introduced Claire to Thomas, making sure I caught every detail of his glowing praise. Claire stayed by my side, but her parents' intentions were clear. They didn't want me in the picture, and I had no idea just how far Gregory would go to push me out. The very next week, I discovered Gregory's scheme to cut me out completely. After the dinner with Thomas, things changed. Subtly at first, then openly. Invitations to the Davenport family gatherings stopped arriving. Claire would hear about them afterward. Her cousin's birthday party, her mother's brunches, even holiday dinners. And when she asked why we hadn't been invited, Gregory's excuse was always the same. "We didn't think Ethan would feel comfortable," he'd say, as if he were doing me a kindness. The truth was obvious. They wanted me gone. At first, I pretended it didn't matter. My own family was small, and we weren't the type to throw grand parties anyway. But it stung to see Claire's disappointment each time she realized we'd been left out. She'd try to hide it, smiling and saying, "It's fine, we'll do our own thing." But I could tell she hated being cut off from her relatives. One Sunday morning, I overheard her on the phone with her mother. I hadn't meant to listen, but the tension in her voice froze me in place. "Mom, Ethan is my partner," she said firmly. "You can't keep pretending he doesn't exist." There was a long pause. Then Sylvia's clipped tone carried through. "Darling, this isn't about him. It's about appearances. People talk. Gregory just wants to protect you. Protect her from me. When Claire hung up, she sat on the couch in silence. I wanted to ask what was said, but the look in her eyes told me enough. I felt torn in two. Part of me wanted to fight harder, to prove myself worthy in Gregory's eyes. But another part whispered that maybe they were right. I was just a mechanic, working 12-hour days in a shop that barely covered rent. What future could I really give Claire compared to the polished, wealthy men her parents paraded in front of her? That night, I sat awake long after Claire had fallen asleep. I stared at the ceiling of our small apartment, the faint hum of traffic outside, and I made a silent vow. I wouldn't let Gregory break me. If he wanted me gone, fine, but I would use that rejection as fuel. I would build something so solid, so undeniable, that one day he'd choke on his own words. I just didn't realize how close his perfect world was to collapsing on its own. The first crack in Gregory's empire appeared in the form of a single letter. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't addressed to me, but it had been slipped under our apartment door by mistake. I saw the Davenport name in bold on the envelope, with the seal of a bank stamped across the corner. Curiosity got the better of me. I didn't open it, but the single word visible through the window on the paper inside was enough. Lien. A lien meant debt. Debt meant cracks. At first, I tried to shrug it off. Gregory was wealthy. Wealthy men had complicated finances. Maybe it was nothing. But the next time I drove past the mansion, I noticed something unusual. 2 of the gardeners were gone, and the front hedges were overgrown. A week later, Claire told me their longtime driver, Henry, had been let go. Gregory had always flaunted his wealth, staff, cars, parties. Now, slowly, quietly, things were shrinking. I asked Claire about it one night as we sat on the couch, her head on my shoulder. Does your dad ever talk about money? She frowned. Not really. He always says we're fine. Why? I hesitated, then said, because I think he might be hiding something. She sat up, defensive. Ethan, my dad may be rude, but he's not careless. He's one of the most respected men in the community. If there was a problem, I'd know. I wanted to believe her, but the signs kept piling up. At the shop where I worked, a client casually mentioned he'd seen Gregory at the bank, looking pale and agitated. Another time, I overheard one of Claire's cousins say their tuition payment was delayed. Pieces were falling together, whether Claire wanted to see it or not. Gregory's empire wasn't as unshakable as he pretended. One evening, I stayed late at the shop, wiping grease from my hands when my boss, Tony, walked over. He leaned against the counter and said, "Funny thing, I heard Gregory Davenport's name at the bank today. Not good news." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Tony shrugged. "Rumors, that's all. But let's just say, when the bank whispers, it ain't about how rich you are." That night, lying in bed beside Claire, I stared at the ceiling again, the hum of the city outside. My gut told me this was only the beginning. The next clue came from a place I never expected, Gregory's own study. I wasn't trying to snoop, not at first. But when someone shoves your face into the dirt enough times, you start paying attention to where they stumble. It began one Sunday afternoon when Claire asked me to grab her jacket from her parents' house. They were away at some gala, and the place was eerily quiet. I stepped into Gregory's study, mahogany shelves, leather chair, the smell of old cigars still lingering, and there it was. A bank statement lay open on the desk, half buried under newspapers. I shouldn't have looked, but one glance was enough to freeze me in place. Multiple overdraft fees. Repeated withdrawals, $5,000, $10,000, always in cash. My hands itched. This wasn't the picture-perfect empire Gregory bragged about at every dinner table. I stuffed Claire's jacket under my arm. But as I left, another detail caught my eye. A second cell phone, screen cracked, charging on the corner of the desk. I didn't touch it, but my mind raced. Who needed a burner phone if they had nothing to hide? That week, I couldn't let it go. I started listening more closely when people in town talked about him. At the auto shop, a customer casually mentioned Gregory had been trying to unload a property. Fast, too fast. At the coffee shop, I overheard a bank clerk muttering to a colleague about another Davenport account shortfall. The cracks were spreading. One evening, I sat with Claire in her parents' den, and Gregory walked in with his usual swagger. "Ethan," he said, eyeing me like a stain on his carpet. "How's life fixing junk for pocket change?" I wanted to throw his bank statements in his face. Instead, I smiled and said nothing. But that silence seemed to unnerve him. His smirk faltered for half a second. Later, as I helped Claire clean up, Aunt May pulled me aside. "You see it too, don't you?" she whispered. My throat tightened. "See what?" Her eyes narrowed. "The truth. Gregory's house of cards is tilting. Be careful, Ethan." Her warning confirmed what my gut already knew. Something big was coming, and I was already caught in the undertow. The next piece of proof didn't come from rumors. It landed straight in my hands. The proof came to me in the least expected way. A folded envelope slipped under my apartment door. At first, I thought it was junk mail. But the handwriting, shaky, deliberate, was Aunt May's. Inside were 3 photocopied pages. My breath caught when I saw the letterhead, First State Bank of Glenwood. The statements were recent, dated only weeks back. The numbers hit me like a hammer. Gregory's main account, once overflowing, had been drained. Tens of thousands gone in a single month. And the withdrawals matched what I'd glimpsed on that stray paper in his office. But that wasn't the worst part. Attached was a foreclosure notice. Not for some random property in his portfolio, but for the mansion itself. The symbol of his pride, the very house where he had mocked me over dinner after dinner, was about to be listed for sale. I called Aunt May immediately. "Where did you get these?" Her voice was quiet. "Gregory's accountant. Old friend of mine. He slipped them to me after he realized what Gregory was hiding." "Ethan, your instincts were right." My chest tightened. I should have felt vindicated, but instead there was a strange ache, almost pity. A man who lorded over everyone now couldn't even keep the roof above his own head. That evening, Claire noticed I was distant. She pressed me, eyes soft with concern. I wanted to tell her everything, but how could I? Her whole life, her family, was tied to that house. So I just said, "Claire, if you found out something about your parents, something that changed everything, would you want to know?" She frowned, confused. "Of course. Why?" I shook my head. "Nothing. Forget it." But I couldn't forget. Not when the walls of their empire were crumbling and the mansion, the crown jewel of their arrogance, was slipping through their fingers. The day I saw the mansion's for sale listing, I knew fate had intervened. The listing went live on a Tuesday morning. I stared at it for nearly an hour, refreshing the page as if the numbers would change. Asking price, $1. For $1 million. Less than I ever imagined that mansion could be worth. Less than what Gregory had once bragged he'd spent just on the renovations alone. I leaned back in my chair, hands trembling. This wasn't just real estate. This was my chance to rewrite the entire script. But I knew I had to be careful. If Gregory or Sylvia got wind of my interest, they'd find a way to block me, even in their weakened state. Pride could make people do reckless things. So, I called an old client of mine from the garage, Mr. Reynolds, a retired banker who had once trusted me to restore his beloved classic Mustang. "Ethan," he said warmly, "haven't heard from you in a while. What's on your mind?" I explained, carefully. He chuckled. "Funny thing, life. Men like Gregory think they're untouchable. But when the banks pull the rug out, the vultures circle. If you're serious, I know a broker who can keep your name quiet until closing." That night, I sat with spreadsheets spread across my tiny kitchen table. Years of saving, side jobs, cautious investments, it all came into focus. I had enough for a strong down payment, and the rest could be financed with careful leverage. Claire noticed the papers, but didn't press. For now, I couldn't risk telling her. This wasn't just about proving myself. It was about protecting her from the fallout. I imagined it. The look on Gregory's face when I walked into his mansion as the rightful owner. The man who called me trash would have to choke on the fact that I now held the deed to his pride and joy. My pen hovered over the first set of documents. Heart pounding, I signed. The first domino had fallen. What I didn't know was that Gregory was already hunting for the buyer's identity. It was supposed to be a simple visit to the realtor's office. Just paperwork, signatures, another step closer to sealing the deal. But when I walked out onto Main Street, I froze. Gregory's black Mercedes was parked right across the street. He stood there, leaning against the car, sunglasses perched like a shield, cigarette dangling from his fingers. His eyes found me instantly. "Well, if it isn't the grease monkey," he said smoothly, flicking ash to the pavement. "Funny place for you to be. Mechanics don't usually hang around real estate offices, do they?" My heart thudded, but I forced a grin. "Just handling some errands. Oil changes, you know." They're complicated these days. He laughed, sharp and cutting. Sure, sure. Don't tell me you're dreaming of houses like these. You couldn't even afford the down payment on the paint job. I wanted to bite back, but I couldn't risk giving him a reason to dig deeper. Dreams don't cost a dime, I said instead, keeping my voice steady. Gregory stepped closer, lowering his voice. Stay in your lane, Ethan. Don't embarrass yourself, or my daughter. She deserves better than some small-time dreamer sniffing around places he doesn't belong. I clenched my jaw. Every word was a reminder of the years he'd spent calling me trash, making me feel like less than nothing. But this time, I had leverage. I had progress he couldn't see. Maybe you should worry less about me, I said quietly, and more about keeping what you already own. His smile faltered, just for a second. I saw it, a flash of unease. Then he slipped back into his mask. Careful, boy. Pride comes before the fall, and I'd hate to watch you trip. He slid into his car and drove off, leaving exhaust fumes and a gnawing suspicion that he was closer to the truth than I wanted. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, staring at the signed documents, my chest tight. Gregory wasn't blind. He was circling, sniffing, testing for weakness. One wrong move, and he would discover I was the buyer all along. The day came sooner than I expected. Papers were ready. The realtor had called me twice that morning, reminding me that all that stood between me and Gregory's mansion was a signature. I asked Claire to meet me there, along with Aunt May. I wanted witnesses, people who had seen me humiliated, dismissed, treated as nothing, people who would understand why this moment mattered. When we walked into the bank's conference room, the realtor smiled and pushed a neat folder across the polished table. Congratulations, Mr. Brooks. You're about to become the legal owner. Claire's eyes were wide, her hand gripping mine. Aunt May dabbed her eyes with a tissue, whispering, Your father would be proud, Ethan. This is justice. But before I could sign, the door swung open. Gregory, of course. He strode in, flanked by a man in a gray suit who looked like a personal attorney. His voice was calm, but his eyes were burning. Imagine my surprise when I hear my mechanic of a son-in-law-to-be is playing real estate tycoon. What's the game here, Ethan? My stomach tightened, but I forced myself not to flinch. No game, just business. Gregory laughed, a deep, mocking sound. You think you can waltz in and buy my house? That's decades of work, of prestige. You don't belong in a place like that. Sign that paper, and you'll choke on the upkeep. The realtor cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Whitmore, you no longer have authority here. The property is listed, and Mr. Brooks has financing. Gregory slammed his fist on the table. He's trash. He can't even keep my daughter in the lifestyle she deserves, and you're telling me you'll just hand him the deed? Claire stood, trembling but firm. Maybe it's time someone else owned it, Dad. Someone who earned it honestly. His face turned scarlet, his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might break. The pen was in my hand now. One signature, and the trap would be sealed forever. Gregory leaned closer and hissed. If you sign that paper, you'll regret it forever. The pen scratched across the paper, steady and deliberate. My name, signed in ink, officially transferred the deed into my hands. A lifetime of insults, slurs, and humiliation condensed into that one moment of finality. The realtor stood, shaking my hand. Congratulations, Mr. Brooks. The property is yours. Gregory's face drained of color. His fists unclenched, then clenched again, like he couldn't decide whether to punch the wall or collapse into a chair. Sylvia gasped audibly, her hand flying to her chest. This is absurd. You can't just give him our home. The attorney beside Gregory mumbled something about liquidation and debt relief, but Gregory silenced him with a glare. His eyes snapped back to me, burning with a fury I'd never seen before. You think this means you've won? You think money makes you equal to me? I swallowed hard, but didn't back down. No, Gregory. Hard work makes me your equal. Discipline makes me your equal. Respect makes me your equal. Money? That's just the proof you were wrong about me. Claire squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. You earned this, Ethan. Every single inch of it. Sylvia looked around the conference room, as if searching for a way to reverse time. Gregory, do something. Stop this before the neighbors find out. But Gregory was unraveling. His calm, polished demeanor was gone. His words spilled out bitter and jagged, raw enough to cut through the air. You'll never be good enough for this family. You can buy the house, the walls, the marble floors, but you'll still be trash in my eyes. For the first time, Claire stood tall against him. Then maybe it's time we stopped caring about your eyes. The room fell silent. Even Aunt May had tears streaking her face, though she smiled at me with pride. The deal was done. The trap had sprung, and Gregory Whitmore had nowhere left to run. His voice cracked as he whispered, "You may own the house, but you'll never own me." Word spread faster than I expected. By the weekend, whispers traveled through every corner of the neighborhood. The Whitmore mansion, the crown jewel Gregory used to parade at dinner parties, now had a new owner. And that owner was me. At the grocery store, I caught neighbors glancing at me, then whispering behind their carts. One old man clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Good for you, son. About time someone showed him he ain't untouchable." Gregory, on the other hand, was unraveling. He stopped showing up at the country club. He stopped attending charity events. And when he did dare to appear in public, his shoulders were slumped, his smile brittle. The empire he had built on intimidation and image had collapsed, not because of bankruptcy papers, but because the man he once called trash now owned the very symbol of his pride. Sylvia didn't fare better. At the local boutique, I overheard her trying to insist the sale was temporary and that they were simply downsizing. But her voice trembled, and the clerks exchanged knowing looks. Her friends had started pulling away. The invitations that once flooded her calendar dried up overnight. Claire, though, had made her choice clear. She moved her things into my apartment, smiling as she unpacked, even though the space was small and modest. "I'd rather live in your tiny place with you," she whispered, "than spend one more night in that cold palace." Still, I could feel the weight pressing on her. She loved me, but they were her parents. Their shame was now her burden too. One night, she admitted through tears, "I can't believe they treated you like that all these years. And now, all they care about is how it looks to everyone else. They never cared about us, Ethan, just the show." Aunt May visited soon after. She hugged me, long and tight, before saying, "You've shown them what real worth looks like. Don't let their bitterness steal your peace." But Gregory wasn't done yet. He still had one card left to play. I knew he was planning something when I saw him outside the mansion gates. Gregory stood outside the mansion gates, his silhouette stiff against the streetlights. For a moment, I thought he might be there to cause a scene. But when I walked closer, I realized his face was pale, his eyes hollow. He looked smaller, weaker, nothing like the towering figure who once ruled every room. "Ethan," he said, his voice low, "we need to talk." I stayed by the gate, arms crossed. About what? Another insult? Another lecture about how I'll never measure up? He shook his head slowly. "No. About survival. You've won this round, I'll admit it. But you don't know what's coming. The banks, the lawsuits, they're circling. If you don't help me now, they'll drag this whole family down, including Claire." For a second, his words stirred something old in me. The boy desperate for approval, the young man aching for respect. But then I remembered every dinner where he called me trash. Every look of disgust from Sylvia. Every time Claire had to defend me when I should never have needed defending. "This isn't about Claire," I said firmly. "This is about you. You gambled everything on image, and now the mask is gone." He leaned closer, gripping the gate bars. "You're my only chance. Think about your future with Claire. Do you want her name dragged through the mud? Do you want to be remembered as the man who let her family fall into ruin?" I took a deep breath. "I won't enable you, Gregory. Not anymore. If you need help, get a lawyer, get a financial advisor, get therapy. But don't come to me with threats dressed as concern. I won't play that game." His face twisted, pride battling desperation. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "You think you're above me now, but you'll regret this." When I walked back to Claire, she was waiting by the car. I told her everything, word for word. She listened silently, then reached for my hand. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "But Ethan, you should know. He's not giving up. Not yet." The very next morning, a thick envelope marked urgent arrived at my door. When I opened the thick envelope, I expected another desperate plea, maybe even a threat. Instead, it was paperwork from Gregory's lawyers, filled with numbers, debts, liens, and foreclosure notices. It was proof of just how deep the damage really went. Claire sat with me at the kitchen table as we read line after line. At first, she cried. For the loss of the family she thought she knew, for the pride that had blinded them all. But when the tears dried, something in her shifted. She reached for my hand, steady and strong. "Ethan," she said, "I'm done protecting them. I just want to build with you now." And that was the moment I realized the mansion wasn't the real victory. Owning those walls, that roof, that symbol, it felt good, yes. But the true triumph was knowing I had built a life rooted in resilience, discipline, and self-respect. Gregory and Sylvia had tried to measure my worth by their yardstick of wealth and status. Yet here I was, standing on my own terms, with the woman I loved choosing me not because of what I owned, but because of who I was. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw their insults back in their faces. Instead, I focused on drawing boundaries. Claire and I visited Aunt May, who welcomed us with a smile and a plate of warm pie. She said something I'll never forget. "Money will come and go, but dignity is the one fortune no one can take from you." So here's my advice. To anyone listening who's been belittled, mocked, or called trash, don't let someone else's arrogance define your value. Let it fuel you. Build your foundation quietly, brick by brick. Someday, when life brings you back to face those who once tore you down, you won't need revenge. Your success will speak louder than any insult ever could. And as for Gregory and Sylvia, they've been forced to downsize, to live a life far smaller than the empire they once flaunted. Claire and I, we're moving forward, one step at a time, building something real. But sometimes, late at night, I still wonder if Gregory is plotting revenge.